everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel, and today I am here to recommend romances to you that I have read off of Kindle Unlimited and I have absolutely been loving. Kindle Unlimited is one of my favorite services that I am currently subscribed to. I am absolutely obsessed. But before I get into the recommendations for this video, I did want to bring up a topic that the author Tiffany Roberts brought up. I believe this was today or yesterday. Tiffany Roberts is a husband and wife author duo, if you didn't know, and they brought up that authors woke up to quite a blow this morning. The KU rate is currently the lowest it's ever been, sitting at 0.004 cents per page read. To break this down, if someone were to read a 300-page book, the author would make about $1.20. The new rate is in part because of people unsubscribing because they're wanting to go on strike against Amazon and the flood of AI generated books that have been thrown up onto the platform. But what Tiffany Roberts brought up is that you unsubscribing from Kindle Unlimited does not punish Amazon at all. They are a mega corporation, you know. You're really punishing the authors that use this service, unfortunately, if you unsubscribe to the service. Now, obviously, if KU is no longer, you know, feasible for you financially, then that's perfectly understandable. But given that so many people have been unsubscribing from the service, it's making it really hard on authors that, like I said, use this service. And I've seen quite a few authors that I follow state that if KU keeps, you know, dropping their rate like this, then authors will have to stop using the service, which would really suck for readers like you and me. So I'm just bringing that up to encourage you that if it is financially feasible for you, please stay subscribed to KU so that we can all enjoy this amazing service. So the books that I'm recommending in today's video are books that I have read so far this year. I have brought up quite a few of these books in plenty of videos that I've made recently. So because of that, I'm not going to delve too deeply into any of these books. This is going to be more of a rapid fire recommendations video. First up, I want to bring up Brianna Hale. So in January, I read 4 of her books pretty much at the same time because I read her Love Don't Cost a Thing duet, and I really fell in love with her writing and her books. So this duet is definitely a darker romance duet that centers around these two brothers, Misha and Damir. And book 1 is a sugar daddy, sugar baby romance between Misha and Sierra. There's also quite an age gap between these two characters. And this one was just a really fun romance, definitely darker, like I said, given the plot going on with Damir, who is Misha's brother, and we're gonna get to him in a second because he's the hero of book 2. This book didn't blow me away by any means, but you definitely need to read this book before jumping into book 2, which is Lap of Luxury. And I loved this book so much, you guys. This is probably one of my favorite dark romances I've ever read because we have Damir, our hero, and he's pretty much a psychopath. Like, he's insane for sure. And he sets his eyes on Bethany, who is Misha, his brother's secretary. And so we see, I believe there's a scene towards the end of book 1 where we see something going on between the two of them, but at the beginning of this book we see that there are definitely sparks flying. And what's really fun about this romance is that Bethany, our heroine, she loves horror movies to the point that they turn her on straight up. And Damir is more than happy to indulge her fantasies with that. There's a really iconic scene where he has taken her captive, so it is a captor-captive romance, and he sets up this scenario where like all the electricity is shut off on the yacht that they're on, and so she's like terrified and he chases after her, and this is just wonderful. What can I say? I've never read a romance quite like this before, and I definitely would recommend it. So then the other books that I read by Brianna Hale are 2 novellas in her Dom Fitness series. This is a novella series that centers around this gym called Dom Fitness, where the personal trainers at this gym are all doms and all the clients that go to this gym are subs or submissives. And so nothing sexual is going on at the gym, but there is that dom sub dynamic going on in the personal training, and it's just like a really cool and interesting concept. But I do want to point out that I think all 4 books that I'm mentioning from Brianna Hale definitely have daddy kink in them, especially this Dom Fitness series. The first novella is more of like a stern dom and a bratty sub dynamic, whereas the second novella, Gym Bunny, which you guys know at this point, I've been raving about this novella a lot lately. This one centers around a plus size heroine, as you can tell from the cover, and this one deals with Trey, who's definitely more of a softer dom. And then Livia, I think that's the heroine's name, she's also a softer sub. She's not as much of a brat like the heroine from book 1. But yeah, these are both just really great novellas, and I definitely look forward to reading more from Brianna Hale. There's a couple of books of hers that are definitely on my radar, and all of her books are on Kindle Unlimited, which is really convenient for me. Next up, I want to bring up a couple of books by Candy Steiner. The first one is Weightless. This is a book that I don't hear a ton of people talking about, but I loved this. I think I had heard Jess from Peace Love Books talk about this book in the past, but Candy Steiner herself is so amazing. Like, she is truly a master at marketing her own books. If you don't follow her on TikTok or Instagram, you are doing yourself a disservice. So she makes these Instagram reels where she'll either post quotes from her books, or she will describe a very specific scene from her books, and it just like immediately sucks you in and makes you want to read them. It's just very smart marketing. And so because I had watched a reel where she was describing a scene in this book, I had to pick it up as soon as possible. So this one is about Natalie and Rhodes. This is definitely more of a new adult romance, and there's also some suspense thrown in towards the end that I thought was really well done, some plot twists going on. But Natalie, our heroine, she's 18 years old. She recently graduated from high school. Her long-term boyfriend breaks up with her and then immediately starts to date a girl who's much thinner than her. And so Natalie takes that as her boyfriend breaking up with her because she's plus sized. And so she decides to go to a personal trainer at the country club that her family frequents. And so we meet Rhodes, who is her personal trainer. He's 21, so there's just a teensy bit of an age gap going on. And he's definitely a grumpy, broody hero, definitely very damaged as well because of his past. And so the scene that Candy has described in one of her Instagram reels was one where Rhodes has Natalie stand in front of a mirror, and he instructs her to tell him all of the parts of her body that she hates about herself. And so as she keeps naming each part of her, like her belly or her thighs or whatever, he like reverently kisses each part of her, and it's just so sweet and swoony and kind of unexpected from Rhodes because, like I said, he is pretty grumpy and broody a lot of the time. And this was just a beautiful romance. Highly, highly recommend it. Definitely had a unique vibe to it as well. And the other Candy Steiner book that I've read recently that I really ended up loving, and I didn't expect to, was Quarterback Sneak, which is book 3 of her Red Zone Rivals series, which is a football romance series that takes place at this fictional college. I believe it's what, North Boston University or something. And so this one in particular is about Holden, who's the quarterback, and Julep, who is the new coach's daughter. She's also on the rehab team for the football team. She's studying sports medicine at this college, and it definitely is a very forbidden romance because Julep's father, like I said, the new coach, he makes it very clear to his team that they are all forbidden from even flirting with Julep, much less dating her. There's also a grumpy sunshine dynamic because Julep definitely has like a grumpy, icy exterior to her. This romance surprised me because I didn't expect it to have as much depth as it did. Like the whole first half, I was enjoying the book, but then the second half really got me, and I was just so invested in this romance. I couldn't help but give it 5 stars. Also, it's Candy Steiner, there, you know it's gonna be steamy, and the sex scenes in this are really great. There's one scene in this in particular that lives in my head rent-free. I also love that Julep, in order to like heal and cope with her guilt of her sister's death, she ends up taking pole dancing classes, and that's something that she's very passionate about. I just thought that that was really cool representation to have in this, and yeah, this was just wonderful. Highly, highly recommend. I also read Blindside, which is book 2 of the series last year. Love that book. Love, love, love that book. And I'm very, very excited to read Hail Mary, which is the 4th and final book. I mean, I can't do a Kindle Unlimited romance recommendations video without mentioning one of my favorite authors, Sophie Lark. I mean, come on. This year, I've read some very iconic books from Miss Lark, one of them being Ivan, which is book 1 in her Underworld series. This, you could read this completely as a standalone. This is a Bratva romance that takes place in St. Petersburg, and we are following Ivan, who's a Bratva boss, and then Sloane, who is an assassin who has been hired to kill Ivan, and it's just wonderful, so fast-paced. You will be on the edge of your seat the entire time. Just such a cool book. And then I've also been reading her Kingmaker Chronicles series, which is a spin-off next generation or second generation series to her Brutal Birthright series, which is very popular here on BookTube and I'm sure on BookTok. But this is just such a fun and unique romance series because it's a mafia romance series at its core, but this also takes place at this mafia college where these kids are training either to be an heir, an enforcer, an accountant, or a spy, and it's definitely inspired by Hogwarts. It's basically mafia Hogwarts. And it also gives me vibes of series like Gossip Girl and Vampire Academy. We have these really great romances at, you know, the core of these books, but there's also drama and tea with other side characters, and there's this crazy yearly challenge known as the Courtum Bellum, and there's just so much going for this series, and I feel that Sophie Lark just like perfectly wrote these books. I very recently read The Bully, which is book 3. That is Dean and Kat's romance, and oh my god, that book was as amazing as everybody said that it was going to be. That is definitely going to be one of my top 10 books of this year. So good. But this series as a whole, like, is just incredible. I have not given any book less than 5 stars at this point, and I'm very excited to read The Spy, which is book 4, probably at some point in May. I do want to quickly mention the Kimora Chronicles by Cora Riley. So this is a spin-off series of her Born in Blood Mafia Chronicles series, and these books are just classic mafia romances to me. Like, if I were to give you my top mafia romance recommendations, if you're just getting into this subgenre, I would recommend these books by Cora Riley, and I would recommend, you know, Sophie Lark's Brutal Birthright series. Those are like my top mafia recommendations. Also, the Antiheroes in Love duet by Gianna Darling. These are just classic mafia romances to me. I think these were the first mafia romances I had ever read, and I went into this subgenre not really knowing what to expect because I was like, clearly all of the major characters in these books aren't good guys, like what, you know, but I ended up falling in love with the subgenre, and I'm very excited for the Mafia Romance Readathon that is happening May 4th through the 7th, by the way. I am going to be a co-host for that. Jen from the Book Refuge put it together, and Jackie and Joe are also going to be co-hosts. So excited for that readathon. But to get back on topic, I finally read the first 3 books of the Kimora Chronicles this year. I had read most of the Born in Blood Mafia Chronicles books last year, and this series has to do with the Kimora, which is the mafia in Vegas. And I had heard nothing but amazing things about specifically Twisted Emotions and Twisted Pride. So I'm putting Twisted Pride over here because it's absolutely my favorite book of the series that I've read so far. And I've just heard from everyone that it's like the best book that Cora Riley has ever written, and I can totally see why. But Twisted Emotions, this one is Nino and Kiara's romance. This one is an arranged marriage romance, and what's so cool and unique about this book is how it tackles the topic of sexual assault. We see that from a young age, Kiara was sexually assaulted by a member of her family, and so seeing her heal from that trauma with Nino, her new husband, who is a stranger to her when she first gets married to him, it's just a really beautiful journey because Nino comes off as like very cold and closed off, and seeing him fall for Kiara and vice versa, it's just a really beautiful romance that definitely took me by surprise in some ways. But Twisted Pride, this one is a captor-captive romance between Ramo, who is the leader of the Camorra, and Serafina. Serafina is a member of I think it's the Chicago outfit, and she gets kidnapped by Ramo on her wedding day. She has been put into an arranged marriage with another member of the Chicago outfit. But yeah, Ramo takes her back to Vegas, and so this is just such an interesting, again, it had a unique feel to it from most other mafia romances that I've read. Like, seeing someone as crazy and unhinged fall for Serafina, and I also love this element of Ramo, oddly enough, setting Serafina free from the expectations that have been put on her whole life. This was just absolutely fantastic, and I would highly recommend both the Born in Blood Mafia Chronicles series and this Camorra Chronicles series. So next up we have Funny Feelings by Tara DeWitt. This is something very different from Cora Riley's books. This one is a friends to lovers romance. Actually, you know what? There's quite a few tropes. I gotta look at my notes. There's a lot. There's friends to lovers, fake dating, single dad, grumpy sunshine, age gap, and mutual pining. And so this one is about Farley, who is a stand-up comedian, and because of that, because we get to see some of her stand-up shows, it definitely gave me vibes of Marvelous Miss Maisel. And then we have Meyer, who is her manager, and he used to be a stand-up comic himself, but basically when his daughter was born, he decided to give that up. But now, like I said, he is Farley's manager, but they've been pining after each other for years, and now the situation comes up where they need to fake date. And this is just such a wonderful friends to lovers romance. There's moments that are really funny, there's moments that are very sweet, there's the perfect amount of spice thrown in. I just thought that this was such a great romance. Highly recommend if you want to read a book that's just going to make you feel great, you know? Next up, I have to bring up the novellas that I've read by Kimberly Ling so far this year. She's definitely become one of my favorite fantasy romance authors that I have ever read. She writes just amazing fantasy rom-coms, and I don't know any author who writes quite like she does. But so far this year, I've read 2 Scoops of Hellfire, which is a complete standalone. This has nothing to do with her Mead Mishap series, which I'll get to in a second. But this one is like a 30-something page novella that centers around our heroine, who is learning to bake during COVID lockdown. And she ends up summoning a demon because she's trying to bake cupcakes. And this demon shows up and he's immediately attracted to her, and things get steamy very quickly between the two of them. And I just think Kimberly Ling combines her amazing and clever sense of humor with some quality spice, you know? What can I say? This was just a really, really fun time. And even though it's like 30 pages, I couldn't help but give it 5 stars. I also read a couple more novellas in her Mead Mishap series. I ended up reading Missile Foe, which is technically a novella that you should read in between That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon and That Time, what is it? That Time I Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf, something like that. You're technically supposed to read this one in between the 2 novellas. It really doesn't matter because I ended up reading these novellas kind of out of order. But this was just a really fun, like, fake mating situation. And so the romance was really great. And then this is the novella where we meet Alexis, who is a talking sword, who is an absolute menace to society. And I love her with my heart and soul. So I cannot recommend Kimberly Ling enough to you guys. Like, she is truly one of my favorite authors, and her 3rd book of the Mead Mishap series is coming out like really soon. Next up, I have to talk about Hold by Claire Kent. I know I've talked about this book so much ever since I read it. I will not shut up about this book. But it's on Kindle Unlimited, so I have to mention it for this romance recommendations video, right? But this is just like a crazy space survival romance that takes place on a prison planet, and I was absolutely sucked in from page 1. Nobody writes like Claire Kent, in my opinion. I have loved every single book that I've read by her. I've only read 3 of her books. I definitely need to read more, but I'm also savoring her books because I don't want to run out. But yeah, this was just incredible, very unique, also very terrifying for sure. Next up, I do want to mention Evolved by N.R. Walker. I don't think I've talked about this book on my channel at all because I gave it 4 stars. So I don't think I mentioned it in like a recent reads video because I didn't absolutely love it, but it is on Kindle Unlimited. All of N.R. Walker's books are on KU. And this is a very unique romance. It takes place in the future, first of all, like in 2068. And it centers around Lloyd, and he purchases this AI robot named Sean, and it's a romance between him and this robot. And it's very sweet, definitely a low angst romance given that Sean is programmed basically to at least like Lloyd, so it's very easy for him to fall for Lloyd and vice versa. But there's also a really interesting suspense element that's introduced in the second half, and I thought that that was really well done. Really enjoyed this book for sure. N.R. Walker just writes the sweetest romances, and I highly recommend them. Next up, I do want to briefly bring up Breaking the Bully by Jessica Cain. I recently reread this novella. This was actually the very first novella that I had read by Jessica Cain. Welp, my camera battery died, but we are back. So we were talking about Breaking the Bully. Yeah, this is definitely Jessica Cain's like most tame novella that I've ever read. This is a bully romance, as you can tell from the title, about Allie and Moore. This takes place when they're both 18 in high school, and we see at the very beginning when they were both 16, they had met for the first time, and they immediately fell for each other because Jessica Cain is a queen of insta-love, but Allie's father is just insane. He's absolutely insane. He's incredibly abusive to Allie, and he tells her, if you don't completely ignore Moore, I will make both of your lives a living hell. And so she has no choice but to completely ignore him when they're in school together. So over the past 2 years, he has become her bully because he's just trying to get her attention in any way that he can, and so he decides to be a jerk to her, basically. And so he then realizes why she's been behaving the way that she has been, and we have some of the best groveling that I have like ever read about, honestly, truly. And this is just a wonderful bully romance. Like, more of you need to be reading this novella and thanking me later. I love this romance so much. This is easily one of my like top 2 favorite Jessica Cain novellas that I've ever read. It is absolutely everything. Next up, I want to mention Get Thee Off My Lawn by Daria Vernon. This is a Regency rom-com about April and Leopold, and the plot of this is that April is raising these 2 swans, and she wants them to breed with each other, become each other's mates, but that's not really happening. And so one of her swans ends up on her neighbor's property, and it turns out that Leopold is her neighbor, and so things quickly get steamy between the 2 of them. I didn't quite expect that, but I was living for it. And this is just such a fun and quirky romance. There's definitely some drama involved as well. I just thought that it was such a fun time. I gave it 4 stars. I definitely would recommend this if you're looking for something a little bit different in the historical romance genre. I also have to recommend Eleanor and Gray by Brittany Cherry. I finally recently read this. This is now my 3rd book by Brittany Cherry that I have read, and I of course gave it 5 stars. I didn't know that this was going to be a nanny romance going in, and I was living because I love nanny romances, and this is one of my favorite nanny romances that I've ever read at this point. It was just so freaking good. But this is a childhood friends to lovers romance between Eleanor and Gray. They start falling for each other when they're in high school. They end up being separated for 14 years. Yeah, a really freaking long time. Brittany Cherry loves to separate her main characters. But they come back in each other's lives because Eleanor becomes Gray's nanny. We see that Gray had married someone and had 2 daughters with her. But his wife ended up passing away in a car accident, so he fully blames himself for that accident and for her passing away. So he just has so much guilt. He's so cold, so closed off now. And so we see Eleanor, you know, worm her way back into his heart, and she forms these amazing relationships with his daughters, and it's just beautiful. It's amazing. I cried as usual when it comes to Brittany Cherry. Just so good. I just have a couple more books to recommend. If you are not reading the Chestnut Springs series by Elsie Silver. This series is truly a form of self-care. If you want to be taking care of your mental health, read this series and thank me later. These books are so freaking good. These are perfect cowboy small town romances that are sexy as hell. Book one, which is Flawless, I read this back in October, but this one is more of like a dislike to love vibe. And we have Rhett, who is a bull rider, and then Heartless, which has taken booktube by storm, I feel like. This one is about Cade and Willa. This one is a nanny romance, and Cade is a cowboy, and we love Daddy Cade. These books are perfection. They are truly flawless, like the title says. I'm actually getting ready to start Powerless, which is book 3, like tonight, after I'm done filming. So I'm trying to get this done as quickly as possible so I can jump into that book. And last but certainly not least, this is your reminder that you need to be reading the Stay a Spell series by Juliet Cross. I think it was only a couple months ago that Juliet Cross put this series on KU, and I think she put a lot of her other books on KU as well, which is very, very exciting. But this is absolutely my favorite paranormal romance series. It has a cozy vibe to it. It takes place in New Orleans. I very recently finally read Rusting Witch Face, which is book 5. The audiobook recently came out and it was amazing. So good. This one specifically was an angsty second chance romance between Jules and Ruben. And if you don't know, this series centers around the Savoy sisters, who are witches, and there's all kinds of other paranormal creatures in this world, and it's just absolute perfection. You absolutely need to be reading this series and thank me later. So that is going to be it for this Kindle Unlimited romance recommendations video. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to recommend more KU books to either myself or to other people that are watching. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!